I dared my best friend to end my life. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Jake and I had always been thrill seekers, but this time we had taken it too far. We were sitting in my dimly lit basement, the air thick with tension. "Are you sure about this?" Jake asked, his voice trembling slightly. I could see the fear in his eyes, but I was determined. The dare was simple yet terrifying. I dared him to end my life. It all started as a joke, a way to prove our bravery. We had been watching horror movies and sharing ghost stories when the idea popped in. Let's see who can come up with the scariest dare. I had suggested. Jake had dared me to spend a night in the old abandoned house at the edge of town. I had done it without hesitation. Now, it was my turn to come up with something even more terrifying. "I dare you to end my life," I had said, half jokingly. But as the words left my mouth, I felt a chill run down my spine. Jake had laughed it off at first, but the more we talked about it, the more we had always been competitive, pushing each other to the limits. But this was different. This was dangerous. Yet, neither of us wanted to back down. "All right," Jake finally said, his voice steady, "but we need to set some rules." We agreed that it would be a mock execution, a way to test our nerves. No real harm would come to either of us. We gathered the necessary items: a fake knife, some ketchup for blood, and a camera to record the whole thing. It was supposed to be a prank, something we could laugh about later as we set up the scene. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach. The basement felt colder, the shadows darker, but I pushed the fear aside, determined to go through with it. "Ready?" Jake asked, holding the fake knife. I nodded, lying down on the cold concrete floor. The camera was rolling, capturing every moment. Jake raised the knife, and for a split second, I saw hesitation in his eyes, but then he brought it down, the blade stopping just inches from my chest. I let out a scream, the sound echoing through the basement. The ketchup splattered, mimicking blood. Jake's hands were shaking, but he continued with the act. "You're dead," he whispered, his voice barely audible. We both burst into nervous laughter, the tension breaking. It was over. Or so we thought, as we reviewed the footage. Something caught our attention in the corner of the screen. A shadowy figure stood, watching us. It was tall and menacing, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. We froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. "What the hell is that?" Jake whispered, his voice filled with fear. I had no answer. The figure hadn't been there when we were filming. It had appeared out of nowhere. We replayed the footage, hoping it was just a trick of the light. But the figure remained, its presence undeniable. Panic set in as we realized we weren't alone. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. But as we turned to leave, the basement door slammed shut, trapping us in. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to move. "This isn't funny anymore," Jake said, his face pale. I could see the fear in his eyes, mirroring my own. We were in over our heads, and there was no way out. The figure stepped closer, its eyes fixed on us. I could feel its malevolent presence, a darkness that seemed to seep into my very soul. We backed away, our hearts pounding. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the confined space. The figure didn't respond, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me. Jake grabbed my arm, pulling me towards the corner of the basement. "We need to stay together," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my mind racing. The figure continued to advance, its movements slow and deliberate. I could feel the walls closing, in the air growing thicker. We were trapped, with no way out. "We have to fight it," Jake said, his voice filled with determination. "But how do you fight something that isn't human?" something that defies all logic and reason. We grabbed whatever we could find, a broken chair leg, a rusty pipe. It wasn't much, but it was all we had. We stood our ground, ready to face whatever came next. The figure stopped, its eyes glowing brighter. I could feel its power, a darkness that seemed to consume everything in its path. We were no match for it. "This is all my fault," I said, my voice breaking. "I never should have dared you." Jake shook his head, his grip tightening on the pipe. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice steady. The figure lunged, its movements swift and deadly. We fought back with everything we had. But it was like fighting a shadow. Our weapons passed through it, leaving us defenseless. I could feel its cold touch, a darkness that seemed to seep into my very soul. I screamed, the sound echoing through the basement. Jake was by my side, his face filled with determination. "We can't give up," he said, his voice filled with resolve. But I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that we were outmatched. The figure was too powerful, too relentless. As the figure closed in, I felt a surge of desperation. I couldn't let it end like this. I had to find a way to stop it, to save us both. But how? In a moment of clarity, I remembered the camera. It had captured the figure, its presence undeniable. Maybe it could be our salvation. "The camera," I said, my voice filled with. Jake grabbed the camera, its screen flickering. The figure seemed to hesitate, its movements slowing. I could feel its power waning, its grip on us weakening. "Keep filming," I said, my voice filled with urgency. The figure recoiled, its form flickering. It was working. The camera was our weapon, our only hope. We continued to film, the figure retreating. I could feel its power fading, its presence diminishing. We were winning. But it wasn't over yet. With one final push, the figure vanished, its darkness dissipating. The basement was silent, the air clear. We had survived, but the memory of that night would haunt us forever. As we left the basement, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had unleashed something dark and powerful. That there had been a mistake, a test of bravery that had gone too far, but we had survived, and that was all that mattered. I hope you enjoyed this story.